Talking about love, right? And tonight we're going to talk about how all right, that's a cheap thrill of mine. So bad. Okay, we're talking about how love hurts.
All right.
I'll never hear the end of that one.
Yeah. So it does. It can.
It can.
Right? It doesn't
It can.
always, because love is typically thought of as a good thing that's not hurtful.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, usually everyone's like, yay for love, right? But it can hurt. Why or how can it hurt?
Yeah. So we want to put that to you. Tell us, what are some of the ways that love hurts? Love can hurt. You can use personal examples. You can use theoretical examples in which no one will be named. Yeah.
Well, love hurts when you want what's best for the other person.
Tell me some more about that. What do you mean by that?
Thomas Aquinas. You want what's good for the other person, and they won't see it. When you love them enough that you'll do what it takes to see them through whatever they're going through. Tough love, maybe? You know, the tough love program.
Well, it also hurts when you lose a friend.
Loss. Yeah.
So it's so long. Or,
I didn't know a way to sum it up better.
When someone you love is hurting themselves, you hurt for them. My grandson's at camp, and it's 7 weeks. In the first week or two, he cries and calls home and wants to come home early, and so we're feeling very sad for him at the moment.
I'm gonna put that as compassion and empathy. Maybe. Is it more than that? Probably more than that. That's
Is there an aspect of helplessness that in that pain, in that you can't go and immediately take that away from us?
Right, just like a friend going through a horrible time. You know, we pray, but we still feel sad for them.
Say unrequited romantic love.
I would add platonic love. Any love that is not reciprocated, right,
Yeah.
is can be painful. And why do we think? Why would you? What would you point to about the unrequited love that causes so much pain?
I just think of angst, unmet expectations, unmet hopes for the future, feeling inadequate, low self-worth taps into insecurity.
Slow down, you got it right.
I'm writing it down, but just
No,
the
it's all
thing of
great.
like highlighting, it's like if you're the type of person who's concerned that you may not be good enough, it just shines a big light on that, and it can feel really painful.
You've made yourself open and vulnerable.
Yeah.
You have given something away to that person. You've given that ownership of yourself away to that person. Now they have it. What do they do with it? Do they respond and they say, you are good enough for that. Like, you do deserve me to respond. I think the same of you. I hold you in the same esteem as you are telling me you hold me. Or do they say, thanks, you know, or nothing, right? Those types of, which then causes all this spinning in ourselves, right? And sort of the way to avoid that is to not have that vulnerability, to block that down. Jerry actually had somewhat of this discussion in one of his classes, and I was too chicken to bring it up. I didn't know who else would echo or understand this, but the great poets Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel wrote, I am a rock, I am an island, right? A rock feels no pain and an island never cries, was he said in the song.
you quoted it.
Yeah, I did it. It was great. When we were preparing. It was
15
amazing,
minutes
right?
ago. It was really cool. You should have.
Yeah. It's basically it's laughter and it's loving I disdain, right? Because those things cause me to be vulnerable, to be open. And so we see that in what characters in the Bible would you point to that would be examples of that open vulnerability of love? Don't go straight to Jesus. Try to find somebody else.
About the Naomi Ruth story, like how she had to go and lie down at the feet and do that, you know, all of the things.
She's a foreigner in a foreign land, had no rights, and could have left. Was even told, go. She said, no, I'm going to take on your burden. I'm going to be with you where you are. That's great. Who else?
I think Isaac being taken up to the mountaintop to be killed
Oh,
by his loving father that
Yeah.
he trusts and wants to please.
yeah, an interesting thing what came across this week or recently about Isaac. Isaac's not
It's
young.
all the same thing, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Isaac is not young when this happens.
Yeah.
He carries the wood. He's old enough to know what's going on. And then he asks, what? Where's the sacrifice? You know, where's the ram? And he knows. Before he gets on the block, it's me. So that's a great example. Who else?
They both were sacrificing though. Abraham didn't want to do that, you know?
Right.
That's a double whammy.
What about Jacob's love for Rachel?
This is a tedious story for me to talk about, right? Because is it a real sacrifice to be with the ugly sister for that long, right?
Let's just talk about the work.
Yeah, that's right. There's a word, right? There's a word, right? All right. But no, I get it, definitely. Yeah.
What about Joseph when all his brothers hated him?
And he could have done whatever he wanted with them at the end.
Absolutely. Gave up on what aspect there? What part of that story speaks to you? I know what I'm thinking about. What speaks to you?
I don't think we ever see him get bitter. I think he has hope the entire time, you know? And he forgave his family, his brothers, without hesitation. What about you?
Yeah, in a position of near ultimate authority, can do with them whatever. They deserve it. And he chooses to withhold that power. He does not sit in the seat of power and exercise it over someone to establish himself. Instead, he submits to the relationship between himself and his brothers, and he thereby repairs that, right, to great ends.
I put forgiveness under love hurts because
Yeah.
I think we think that that's going to hurt and that that's negative and that shows weakness, and it's very difficult to do sometimes, right?
Talk more about
But it's one of those things that I guess once you do it, you feel better. It's like it's not a hurtful thing. It maybe could go in both columns, right? So,
It's freeing.
yeah, it's freeing. It's as much for you as for the other person in many cases. For Joseph, you know, it was probably really difficult. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he'd just been waiting for them to come and to see them again. You know, maybe he'd forgiven them a long time ago. I don't know. But that can be very difficult to put it in the love hurts
On
column.
the Joseph story, maybe to expand, I always think about the 10 brothers, you know, Joseph and Benjamin. Talking about favoritism from a parent. And I know there are people that you feel like you're kind of a black sheep to your family, and you're not dating on like your siblings. That stings. I'm not saying what they did was right, but it's one of the
But you kind of understand.
Yeah, but it's just, you live your life like that, and you never measure up to dad's standards, and it's up on your little brother, that's gonna eat at you. I don't care who you are.
Yeah. It's a shame what would happen, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to go into it because I think we could, yes, go ahead.
What about David and Jonathan?
Mm.
The love they have for each other.
That goes to
Actually, yeah.
I want to see you spell Mephibosheth.
Glad it's him. I typically take a pen. I'm not writing down. Yes.
Hosea.
I don't think I got it right.
Let's see.
Who? Whoa, there's one more.
Hosea.
What was it?
Say more, go on.
I'd say David and Saul.
He still loves
Mm.
Amber.
What I love is that I've got one example and none of y'all have taken it yet, so that's great.
Well, if you go to the New Testament, you've got Mary, Martha, and Lazarus.
I mean, yeah, where he dies, and they told Jesus when he was sick, come on, he's sick, he's sick. And he delays and he ends up dying. So that was good. That was tough love, hurtful love, and they had experienced death, but yet he's raised again.
Going back to the Joseph story, there's an example there of spiritual maturity, because in a time of hurt, when he could have been viewing relationships, he chose to look at that as the providence of God. He saw through his own pain, and he saw how God had used him to protect his family and others. And, you know, I think there's probably a lesson there for us. If we are experiencing and going through pain, we maybe need to look at the good that may come out of that when we allow God to use us.
How about Abraham and Sarah, when he called her his sister? He called him,
I think she was upset.
he said she was his sister. That instant.
The father and the prodigal son.
Good one, yeah. These are great.
What about Paul and Timothy?
Tell us about Paul and Timothy.
I mean, Paul thought of Timothy as his son, basically.
Yeah, cared for her very much.
The example of vulnerability that we had talked about was Stephen in Acts. Now that's like very extreme, right? A lot of what you guys are talking about, they're extreme examples. There are extreme stories here. But Stephen goes to his death praying for those who are murdering him. I'm not there, folks. Right? I don't know, anybody feel like they've got that kind of confidence in their faith? That if, as you're being stoned for your faith itself, that you could withstand that? I mean, I hope I could, but I don't know that I'm there.
And we said don't use Jesus, but Jesus did the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus is the perfect example.
So we kind of hit that back there.
Yeah.
So I had passed out so we were talking about the cost of love.
Wait.
Don't miss-
Question. Before we move on to the next part, the costly love costs us. Why is it important for us to acknowledge that love hurts? It's not always butterflies and rainbows. Happiness.
So that when it does, we're not completely destroyed.
Good. Yeah. Can there be a tendency to think that if I'm doing what's right, good things are going to happen to me, God's going to bless me and have a good life. And once I do something wrong, that's when bad things happen. But if we're people of God, if we act like Jesus, if we love people, we're going to get hurt. That's part of it, right? It's built in, it's with the package. So I don't know, I think it's really important just to acknowledge this, just to talk about it, and just to say, God doesn't promise us riches and happiness all the time, and his love doesn't deliver that, and that's not what that's not the whole story of love in any story in the Bible. And much less Jesus himself, who, I mean, I'm sure he had happy times, but a lot of the stories are about bad things happening to him, or, scary stuff, or, the end of his life. So, yeah, important to talk about, important to acknowledge, important to say, when you're people of Jesus, when you're disciples of Jesus, and you love people, that's going to hurt. It's not always going to be happy, good. I don't know. blessings from God. Or you may not feel that way. Maybe that's not the right way to say that, but I think you guys know what I'm saying.
I think that's good. No, the story that I think we can go to directly off of that, or rather the verse that I wanted to talk about, it speaks directly to that. Really, really quickly we can talk about this. Matthew 16:24. Somebody pull that open and read that.
Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.
So we have our translations which say cross, and when we hear cross, we think of the cross, right? The cross on which Jesus was sacrificed. Had Jesus been sacrificed at the time that he was speaking this to the people? So there's the word that was used there is stauros, S-T-A-U-R-O-S, stauros. It's pole stake, and it does have a meaning with the cross because that is the same word that was used for the stake on which people were crucified. And people would have known, yes, the Romans, that's what they do, right? I mean, about 100 years before Jesus, there were crosses along all the roads for the prior rebellion where people had been sacrificed. But the word stake also, the same word is also used when talking about tent poles or anchors for buildings. And the way we use stake is similar. The way we use stake in the sense of staking something in the ground is similar to that use as well. And so there is a possible interpretation that can be made here that Jesus is imploring them in using the language of his time to make more than one message. And he's not just saying, come and be crucified today, right? Because he is saying, deny yourself, not necessarily be killed, but to take up your stake. Whatever it is that you have planted, remember the Oklahoma Sooners, right? When, not the football team now, but the land grab for people in Oklahoma. What did they do, right? They threw the flags up and they did, boom, they planted their stake in the ground. They staked out their claim. In the same way, if you were putting a stake for your tent, or your center pole in your tent, you were staking out, this is my area. This is that which is mine. This is for me. Yes, ma'am.
Another verse that I've always had trouble with is you must leave your father and your mother and follow me. That's like under pride. That's tough love, Jesus said. I can't quite quote it right, probably, but.
I wish I could rip it out there for you, but I kind of know what you're talking about, but I can't quote it.
You know, I guess he was talking to when he talked to the disciples, I guess, and he's saying.
This is when they come and say, your mother and your brothers are looking for you, and Jesus says, these are my brothers and sisters. If anyone comes after me, right? Is that where it is?
No, he said, whoever follows me will
Hate
Says
your
if you love
mothers.
mother and
must
father more
leave
than
your
me,
mother and
you're
father,
not worthy.
whatever. Because I think somebody wanted to bury their parents, or bury their father, and he said,
Oh, yeah.
let the
Dead.
dead bury the
Yeah,
dead.
let the dead bury the dead.
If you come to me and you don't hate your brother and your mother and your father, then you're not worthy or something
No,
like
that's
that.
not what it says.
That's a different one? That's what it
It says
says.
it.
It says hate your mother and
Multiple
father.
times.
Well, that's,
I want to read that Greek. Let me see.
well, anyway, I've always had trouble with that, about, you've got to be willing to give up everything to follow Jesus.
This goes back to the rich young ruler, right, that Jesus loved, that we talked about last week or 3 weeks ago.
Every week,
He was, he wasn't willing to pick, what was his stake? It was
Well,
all of
but those
his
are possessions.
possessions,
And
yeah,
we're talking about relationships.
yeah.
I think they're very similar.
Well,
I
I
know
think
that.
in that same string of stories, right, there's a guy who's like, Jesus, I'll follow you, but let me first go bury my father.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's when
Yeah.
he says that, right? So like all these people that have things that they're unwilling to stake up and follow Jesus, pick up their,
So you've anticipated my question. Just before you add, I was going to ask, what are our stakes? What are the things that we stake our claims on? What are the things that we put in the ground as ours and we say, this is my area?
I think that it already got flushed. I was gonna say it like letting go of an idea of identity, or who time to, well, this is who I am, and being willing to let go of that to follow Jesus is, I think, the spirit of that.
Yeah, I mean, in that same verse, he is saying, deny yourself. So you must separate yourself from what you have called yourself, and you must now tie your identity to me. And that's more than right belief, you know?
That also answers your next question, which was, you know, what might be your state depth? What might be the idea of who you are?
Yeah.
You know, if you're a strong identity, it's that you're an engineer that works out at AEDC, and that's just who you are, and that's something you have to give up to follow Jesus. That might be. Does that make sense?
It does, to me.
You know.
What about you? I think there's something in that message that if you go as yourself and you are preaching the gospel with your actions or your words, and it is for your own identity, then it is lost. And that's, to me, it's difficult to put into words exactly how that manifests itself. But I do know that I feel a certain discomfort about never having a place to rest my head, never being in a place that I can call home, because I do not have, I keep doing this, I'm sorry, I do not have a home that I can stake out for myself. Instead, my home, my identity, my life should be in following Jesus. And I think the how do we get there is a difficult part.
I think that section of verses that Miss Margaret just made reference to, the heading in my Bible that I'm looking at says the cost of following Jesus. And it's where he is saying foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't have a place to lay his head. And that's where he goes on to say, follow me and let the dead bury the dead. But it's the cost that, that's what you guys are trying to, right?
What's that?
I told you there would be a perfect segue.
Yeah, the perfect segue.
To your-
So we're going to skip the little video that I cued, because I don't think it works. I don't think it works now.
Okay.
I think it would just be for my own. So
It's a good video, though.
Yeah, it's a good video for, we'll talk about it another time. But we passed around this costly grace, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who can.
Do you have any more copies of that? We didn't get any. Or can we share some?
If you got more one to share, remember
Yeah,
John the Baptist
we
said if you
made
have,
20, and it looks like there's maybe 30
We're
people in here.
John the Baptist said if you have 2 copies, share to the other person that has with you, right? I think that's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah.
They can have mine, I'll still
We're
share.
we're good, we can
First.
share, thank you.
Sure.
But I'll read from this. Who can give me a quick synopsis on Dietrich Bonhoeffer? I'm sure a ton of y'all are familiar with him. I was not so familiar with him until we started reading into this.
German pastor, simple.
That's it, right? German pastor.
There's a
Who,
movie about him. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen that. It's been a lot quicker than reading this book.
Then there's one with Tom Cruise. I think he's in that one too.
He became part of the resistance to the regime there. He had chances to leave the country. He
Yeah.
came to the States for a while. He went to England for a while, but he couldn't stay away. He had to go back, and he became a prisoner, and then he was eventually put to death.
Yeah.
Resisting.
I'm not sure the order of how all of that happened, but the thing that struck me is that his relatives or friends had secured for him safe passage in 40 or 39 or 40 or 41 into the United States, a place to preach and teach in New York City. And he goes and he starts going to a church in Harlem and seeing all of the passion for Christ that these people are having in a society that was segregated, right? And he's seeing the oppressed worshiping God, and that's not all of it, but he is convicted that he has to go back and he cannot live the gospel by being safe from the suffering of his fellow Germans. And so he goes back, and he is then somehow involved with his brother-in-law and some other member, maybe a sister and some other members of the family, in an attempt to assassinate Hitler. And he is imprisoned And while he is imprisoned, for a time, he is not in a maximum security area, and he is able to comfort those that he is in prison with and preach the gospel to them and give them reassurance. And there's, some stuff and things that I've read about him. In the foreword of this book, there was discussions about how he impacted those that he was around, and all the way up, he had the hope of Christ all the way up until his final day when he was executed by the Nazis right before the war was over. I mean, right before.
1945.
In fact, I believe he was executed because they knew that they were about to be overtaken within weeks or months. It was very close to the end. So this is pulled from some of his writings, and this is about what he calls costly grace. So we're going to read a couple of passages from this. You don't have to follow along, but we'll just read it and then we can talk about it. Cheap grace means grace as a doctrine, a principle, a system. It means forgiveness of sins proclaimed as a general truth, the love of God taught as the Christian conception of God. An intellectual assent to that idea is held to be of itself sufficient to secure remission of sins. The church which holds the correct doctrine of grace has, it is supposed, ipso facto, a part in that grace. In such a church, the world finds a cheap covering for its sins. No contrition is required, still less any real desire to be delivered from sin. Cheap grace, therefore, amounts to a denial of the living Word of God, in fact, a denial of the incarnation of the Word of God. Grace alone does everything, they say, and so everything can remain as it was before. Instead of following Christ, let the Christian enjoy the consolations of grace. That is what we mean by cheap grace, the grace which amounts to the justification of sin without the justification of the repentant sinner who departs from sin and from whom sin departs. Cheap grace is not the kind of forgiveness of sin which frees us from the toils of sin. Cheap grace is the grace we bestow upon ourselves.
All right, that was a lot. How would you
Yeah.
sum that up? Anybody want to sum that up?
I don't know that I do it very well. What did y'all hear?
Cheap grace doesn't require a sacrifice. Real belief in Jesus means standing up and opposing unjust ways in front of people where you might be hurt. I mean, that's what Jesus did. He spoke up against unfairness, injustice, sin. all the things.
What might cheap grace look like functionally as a person or as a church or as a Christian?
So we continue in sin that grace may abound. I think that's pretty much what
Like
he's saying.
well, yeah, what Paul says, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. That you confess, you believe in Jesus, and grace. It's not works; it's grace that saves you, right? So there's nothing you can do, so you might as well just keep doing what you've always been doing. I think that's what he's talking about. Anybody hear something different?
Yeah.
Says it clearly as 3B.
Yeah. Cheap grace. Yeah, read that.
With the very last one.
Yeah.
Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate.
Yeah. Okay.
I think cheap grace is to some extent the debate over grace, the debate over justification by grace alone versus justification by acts itself.
But Andy said that love is costly.
Yeah.
It costs something.
Yeah.
And so he talks about costly grace. So I'll read that part. That's the next heading, right? Costly grace, on the other hand, is the treasure hidden in the field. For the sake of it, a man will gladly go and sell all that he has. It is the kingly rule of Christ, for whose sake a man will pluck out the eye which causes him to stumble. It is the call of Jesus Christ at which the disciple leaves his nets and follows him. Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again. the gift which must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and it is grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son. You were bought at a price, and which has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. And what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. And at the end, happy are they who know that discipleship simply means the life which springs from grace, and that grace simply means discipleship. Okay. So, costly grace. What did you hear? What did you hear there?
I think that we know that it's costly, but we con ourselves into believing that we're okay, and that grace is cheap. I think that was what he was getting at.
Okay. We can't, yeah. I think you can. What is the cost to us that's separate from the cheap grace? We don't need to do anything.
Maybe present yourselves as a living sacrifice, which means, doing those things which maybe you sometimes don't feel like doing, or you don't want to, or it's outside of your comfort zone, but it's continuous. A living sacrifice means you continue to do it as you continue to live, but sacrifice being, whether you want to or not, probably more costly if you don't really want to, but you do it anyway. But that's what I think of. It's kind of like when you were reading that, in my mind, I was sort of thinking it resounds the take up your cross and follow me, kind of that same
Yeah. Pick up
idea.
that steak and come.
Pick up
Yeah.
your stuff and do what I asked you to do.
Yeah. Good. Really good.
I just think of it as, it's a complete surrender to God and His Word. You just empty yourself and you just empty yourself and take on Him.
Yeah. It means you have to change. You can't just continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you become content with this grace, you never fully realize what Jesus really has for you. You don't walk into the abundant life. You don't understand the abundant life. You become settled with less than what God is wanting you to have.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. Yeah. So cheap grace says, I think this life is more fun if I do it this way, or I'm going to enjoy it more. I think it's better for me if I just do the things that are easy for me. You don't see that full life that you can have, that you have to continue to chase after.
I think I've always kind of approached Dietrich Bonhoeffer's idea of cheap grace when it is accountable to what it means to have personal sin in my life, and my view or theology of my sinful nature and how I see forgiveness of my sins and the way I live, and I think he's trying to get at something a little bit richer than just how you individually live or see your sin or how you act with sin. I was looking at that first sentence where he says that, or in the second paragraph, says cheap grace means grace sold on the market like cheap jacks wares, he says, the sacraments, the forgiveness of sin, and the consolations of religion. So, I mean, from what I've said, it's pretty much that second point, the forgiveness of sins, which he hits upon. But he's also talking about the sacraments and the consolation of religion. And what are those? And I think the sacraments are some of the things that we do together, like communion, devotion to communion, and other sacraments that we participate in the church. But also the consolations of religion would be prayer and life together. I mean, you wrote a whole book called Life Together. And I think devoting yourself to discipleship is much more than just your own personal life and your individual forgiveness of sins. It's about a devotion to family that's much richer than your individual life. And I think I see cheap grace sometimes when I witness people who think they're participating in the good life, like how that was said, but don't have any connection with discipleship and what it looks like in togetherness, because it's challenging to live as a disciple when you're faced with life together at times. You have to put yourself last in any number of ways in those relationships. And I think that's really important, just as important as your own view of your individual sin.
I think that's awesome. And that's when you started talking about the deeper appreciation, and you start talking about the first part there where he says the sacraments, forgiveness of sin, and the consolation of religion thrown away at cut prices. I think the cut prices is illuminating the less than full experience of the relationship with Christ, because we are using these things as gateways. We are setting forth certain practices. Okay, when I came in here, I sang at least 3 songs, right? We had the Lord's Supper. He got up and spoke. I didn't get up to use the bathroom or anything the whole time. I sat there very quietly. There, check. Sunday, done. Right? And I'm not saying that's like what we do. What I'm saying is we can find ourselves going into a
going through the motions.
Yeah, to a systematic kind of activity as opposed to going deeper into the relationships like you're pointing out. And I think then when you get to that point of what follows from going through the motions is that you start to make the doctrinal lines that you draw that define you, as opposed to the way that you are living through Christ to define you. And those things trickle down. They are seen by the people that were raised in the church. And they begin to repeat those kinds of things, and that's what they tie their religion to, these cheap versions of the sacraments, as opposed to a deeper understanding of why we perform these things in the first place, to remind us of the reconciliation of Christ, of God to his people, right, through Christ, and to live that out in our daily experience with one another. One thing I would point out as well, or at least I would take, and this is an opinion, this is not going to be anywhere in here, after reading some of this book, I think he points to the Bonhoeffer's pointing to the dichotomy of the Pharisaical society that was there, who had made the law their God. They had supplanted God with the law in what they might have thought was a righteous pursuit of God, but instead of honoring God through relationships and through their individual sacrifice towards one another, they would put animals on the stake or on the altar and burn them and say, that's what makes us right, or I'm going to honor this, going to honor the Sabbath and those laws, and that is what is going to bring God here, not my pursuit of the love of God or the love of my brother.
I would add, I think Bonhoeffer isn't talking personally either, or maybe not just personally. He's not saying you personally have a cheap grace because you haven't changed your life. I think he's talking to a systemic, a church kind of an atmosphere where you can go to church and it may not just be accepted, but it might be preached that this you're good the way you are, or you don't need to have transformation, or that that doesn't challenge you, that doesn't allow you to grow, that doesn't, disciple you, right? That it's not just that one day you chose, like, I'm just happy being me and continuing in a sinful life or
Yeah.
what you see, but it's a community that surrounds you that allows you to continue to do that.
You got to a point of comfort and you were okay with going that far.
You wonder too, when he wrote this, whether there was any direction towards the Nazi church. I mean, to stand for certain principles in his time meant, a complete political, social suicide. And I mean, I'm sure this is written to clergy, and I don't know when he wrote this and how it relates to that time frame, but I mean, my goodness, standing for certain things would get you put in prison or, declergified. I don't know what the right word for that is, but, taken away from any type of opportunity to be clergy in a German church. And serious repercussions. Obviously, he was in prison at some point in time for that.
Yeah, and I think that example is what we can kind of go back to what we talked about earlier in class, the very beginning of this class, that brings up that Job dynamic. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, by all accounts, I think by all of our opinions, would be someone who followed the Lord. He went back into harm's way, and I don't know about the assassination plot. We can debate on that. But
Probably in the movie.
he provided comfort to those who were in the state of oppression from the Nazi regime. He facilitated that role, and he died for it. His story, individually, is not one of conquest here on earth. It is not one that ended well for him. But here we are, reading about this individual German minister because of the impact of his actions. And so those are the pictures that we can see in the reverse about how God's story is playing out are always so much clearer than when we're looking forward and living through them. And it just bears, I think, emphasizing that examples like this show us that we may actually never get to experience the positive that the Lord is working through us. And that is a discomfort with which we have to be resigned to, that
Can
it's
you
okay.
repeat that? Just
I
what
don't
you
know
just
if I
said, it
can.
was good. But I didn't hear it. Oh, never mind
The
then.
last part, the
The
last 10
last thing you
seconds
just said.
about missing out on the good
Yeah.
that the Lord is doing now, and never, we may not see it in our lifetime.
Yeah,
Or maybe you just repeat
That
I
was
think he did
like
just a
how
great
he-
job.
how
Yeah.
he died.
No, sure.
We see his life not ending well because it ended in death. But I think because of his faithfulness, it ended well for him. He stood the course. He we can call him a martyr, whatever. And I think that's that, like Stephen when he was being stoned. I mean, he knew what was important, no matter what was going to happen to him.
And Ryan was talking about, it's not an individual thing too, the importance of community and having a community that tries to walk in this way. And Bonhoeffer was, Tübingen educated, left brain, rational guy. And when he came to the States to teach in seminary, complete a seminary degree in Unity, he attended an African American church. This has been back in the 30s. And he was immersed in a community of resistance. A community that knew what it was to suffer. And that had an impact on his courage to go back into his own context.
So here we are talking about Bonhoeffer. Should we be talking about a minister that was, or individuals that were part of the church that he lived in while he was in the States? The impact that they had just by living out their faith and how that multiplied. It's a great point.
I think it's also, the writing is somewhat of an indictment against the church in Germany that remains silent in the face of Nazi oppression. And if you read Dr. King's letter to Birmingham jail, it echoes similar type of thought, is how can Christians remain silent in the face of segregation, calling out people of faith to really live out what they say they believe. And so contextually, we ought to pause a moment and ask ourselves, are we in some way complicit in what we see in our own society that I would say we could say are far from what we consider to be the kingdom of God? And are we reluctant to call it what it is? Do we feel like we should not have a voice that brings light to some of the oppression in our own time? So Bonhoeffer, Dr. King, others that have been willing to speak out against the oppression of their day and are calling the church to a different way, that is, I think, what we need to hear. It's costly to consider that, isn't it? It's costly to consider what that might cost. So I would encourage us to think a little bit about how that might impact what we're thinking about.
Bell rang, USA's playing.
First bell.
I don't see any reason to continue going.
No, I think it's something to think about until next week. I think we got another class, probably.
I don't know if we got a full class material, but we're gonna have one.
Yeah, maybe we'll have some questions or something. Love is hard. Love hurts and it can be difficult. And so the question I have is, how do we love when we don't want to? Something to think about before next week. How do you love someone, or how do you show love when you just really don't want to? And don't pretend like you always want to. Yeah, I do. All right, y'all have a great week.
Thank you.